Right now, let's turn to Sir Iain Duncan Smith, Conservative MP, former Conservative Party leader as well. Very good afternoon to you, Sir Iain.
Afternoon.
Thanks very much. So, are you far right?
Well, it seems that everybody is far right, according to Keir Starmer, most of the British public, and any other normal commentator. The truth is that where he fails, and the Labour Party, by the way, I've been in this place for a long time, and every time a Labour government gets into a problem, they accuse everybody that's attacking them of being far right. It happens all the time. Fascist is normally used. They haven't used it this time, but it's normally fascists, Nazis. These are always hurled at you. I've never heard a Conservative attack everybody else for being communist. I mean, it doesn't seem to stick, does it?
But it doesn't have the same connotations either.
No. But the real issue is the people that originally raised this, by the way, Anne Cryer, was a highly respected Labour MP. And they attempted to silence her because she was saying there is a problem in these areas. There's a cultural problem where these gangs, mostly, as I say, she was referring to people of Pakistani heritage, young men, not all, and you make the point earlier on, it's absolutely true. The vast, vast majority of people go about their lives and live proper lives and don't do this sort of thing. But there is a culture of some of these gangs. They weren't just doing this, by the way, they were dealing drugs as well and various other things. And the reality is that they preyed on these very vulnerable girls. And many of these girls were coming from dysfunctional, broken homes, and many were in care, coming out of care, you know, really, really with very little education and not a lot of understanding, and they were preyed upon because they were vulnerable. So why don't we focus on the girls instead of focusing on what we think is the motivation behind why you want to raise an issue? And the truth is, the report that they refer to, which they want to bring about now, the reason why there was delay earlier was because the then Conservative government was concerned that it hadn't really covered the whole of the issue. For example,
now this is the thing, because this report from Sir Professor Alexis Jay was a 7-year report. They actually had 4 different chairs. It took 7 years. They only spent 10 days talking about the grooming gangs specific issue. It was very wide ranging. It was church abuse, everything else. But it was reported in 2022. Not a single one of those recommendations was brought into law. Whatever concerns the last Conservative government had, they didn't actually enact any of those recommendations.
Yeah, I'm not here to defend them, by the way. What I want to say very simply is the reason why the debate was going on behind was because this hadn't confronted the issue of the gangs. I think the word gangs in the report occurs once in the whole of it. And there are many other towns that had a problem and they weren't even looked at. So the reason why you've got people now saying that there should be a proper inquiry, it's because it didn't deal with culture, it didn't deal with location, and it didn't deal with the fact that we have a huge problem over gangs, and these particular gangs and ethnic gangs as well. So these were not dealt with really properly in the report.
And that's the key.
I think we should have implemented recommendations immediately, but we should have said these bits need to be redone and looked at again. So
but there's an argument. I mean, when people who are victims and when people are who were whistleblowers are saying we need to have a full inquiry, I'm of kind of the view that, you know, if they feel that's what's necessary, I'm inclined to bow to their greater knowledge. However, I do worry about these things. They cost hundreds of millions of pounds. They take many, many years. Do we learn anything new? What we really need is people to be held to account. We need the men who committed these crimes to be arrested, to be prosecuted, and to be hopefully convicted and jailed. And by the way, you know, a lot of these people who've been convicted already are on their way out, or already out of jail, because again, you get 10 years and then you only serve 5. Sorry. That nonsense has got to stop, and I've been saying that for 20 years. You get sentenced to 10, you serve 10, not even a day less than that. But also, we need to have the people who turned a blind eye, who knew what was going on, the social workers, the police, the counsellors and everything. We need those people prosecuted. Now, what do you make of this new law that Yvette Cooper, Home Secretary, suddenly made as an emergency announcement last night, promising this law to be brought in the spring, the bill to be brought in the spring, to tackle child abuse cover-ups? Basically, if you're a professional, if you're in a position of trust and you are aware of child abuse allegations and you do not raise them, you do not take them to the authorities, you will be guilty not just of professional misconduct, but also criminal action.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we should be doing, no question at all. The real issue here, though, is that the reason why there is a problem is because we haven't dealt with the issue of the clash between the culture that was a problem at the time, which is you must be very careful not to be seen as racist. If you raise this issue, nobody wanted to do it because it would stigmatize them. So they had that as their main issue. And the well-being of these young girls was secondary. In fact, so secondary that, as you've seen in some of the cases, they were attacked for being sluts, for being, they're up to it, it's not their problem, it's not the boys' problem. That was the problem. Disparage those who were the vulnerable so that you don't have to deal with the problem of these gangs and particularly these ones that had become culturally Pakistani young men who were then culturally creating this major problem. And it wasn't just in the north, it was in places like Oxford and elsewhere.
Yep.
Some of these places were never looked at. So that's the problem. We have to, yes, absolutely, if you ignore it. But let's get to the reason why you ignored it. You ignored it because many of them were scared stiff or worried that somehow they were going to be stigmatized for having picked on particular individuals from different cultures. The answer is justice has to be blind. And at the end of it all, it doesn't matter who does this stuff, that you want to make sure this can never happen again. And this has been a terrible event.
Well, that's it. I mean, we saw certainly two-tier justice then, and we've been seeing it since post-Southport riots, where we've seen, people who are Muslim carrying weapons, attacking people outside a pub, or marauding and threatening people, not facing any criminal action whatsoever, but people who were attacking Muslims, quite rightly facing action, but people writing tweets, I think, wrongly facing action. We're seeing it right now. There's no reason to think things have changed. Now, Robert Jenrick has said in an interview today, he's a Shadow Justice Secretary, that some immigrants coming to Britain have backward, frankly, medieval attitudes to women, and that is what led to the Grooming Gangs. Millions of people coming to this country from countries where they have these backward, medieval attitudes to women, coming here, not integrating, not assimilating, no one expecting them to. What a surprise, he's basically saying, I'm paraphrasing, that this has happened. Is he right to raise that?
Well, let me put it like this. I think the issue here, and this has been raised by a number of people from different ethnicities, that we have a problem in sort of the idea of multiculturalism. That is to say, everybody lives their own culture. While everybody can have elements of their own culture involved and all the rest of it, I understand that, and celebrating things that they might do for various religious festivals, that's fine. The problem is you can't let people in the UK develop in completely different lines, because all that happens is you end up with a broken society. What we want is people to come together under a British cultural element with various elements which enrich our society that come from other cultures. We've had immigration from various cultures all over the world all their lives, and they retain some of those cultures, but they accept and assimilate the idea of the concept of Britishness as a culture. Now, I know that may sound old-fashioned, but I think that's the basis of the problem, that we've allowed, and this is where I think so many of those who turned a blind eye did so because they had a view somehow that this was culturally acceptable for certain groups to do certain things. It can never be in Britain for that to happen. I think we need to address that. It's not a far-right issue. It's about being sensible and saying, look, always care about the victims, because they are the marker for what the problem is going on elsewhere. And you need to look at that and say, this can't happen again.
And indeed, and again, people focused, I remember when this was first in the news years back, the focus was always like, oh, you can't make it all about it because they said Asian men, it became Pakistani, Muslim men. You can't make it all about that because they're not the only people committing crimes. These grooming gangs, yes, specifically, are massively overrepresented population, but also, crucially, the reason why they were able to carry on for so long and have so many victims was because of their ethnicity and their religion. That's why they were protected. Talking of far right, the first bit of our conversation was, are you far right? There's news about someone genuinely far right, Jean-Marie Le Pen. The father, of course, of Marine Le Pen, still running, obviously, for the French presidency, the man who was president of the National Front in France from 1972 all the way to 2011, has died at the age of 96. Your reaction to that news, Sir Iain?
Well, I'm obviously sad for the family, but he wasn't somebody that I supported in any particular way. I thought he is also part of the problem. When you start taking things to the fringes, when you take them to the absolute end, where everything is blamed on those who didn't necessarily live there, who had come in, You can't do that because the vast majority of those who come to countries want to get on. They come for a reason. They come because they want to improve their lives, etc. So, but it's the extremes of that, if you're not careful, that you badge everybody with. But certainly he was a formidable politician in France. Got to be, I think, in the runoff against... forgotten which president it was now.
He did quite a few. I mean, Marine Le Pen's on. She's done two, and I think he did three or something. But the vote of the Le Pens has gone up each time, has it not? Two things more I want to talk to you about. One is this debate in Parliament yesterday as a result of 3 million people signing an online petition. We spoke to the man who did the petition, basically saying, look, the Labour government promised various things. They completely lied. I think we should have another general election. 3 million people signed that. A Labour MP basically said yesterday that the general election petition was a product of foreign interference. Is she right?
I've no idea, but it's come to me over time. If I'd seen her, I'd have said to her very good, don't attack the public. It's never a good idea. They're the people that put you here and can get rid of you. The best thing is to debate it and to say why you don't agree with it. And that's the purpose of Parliament. Is, once you start turning your guns on, these people out there that are all from overseas somewhere, well, maybe some of them are, I don't know. I don't know how this was all attested. But there is a rule in Parliament that when it crosses the 100,000 threshold, you get a debate. So just go and deal with it.
Them's the rules. Just finally, as a former Work and Pensions Secretary, it's an extraordinary story emerged in the last 24 hours. More than £500 million of taxpayers' money was handed out to dead people in just 5 years because of a pension rule. Mistaken payouts were made and admitted by the government minister yesterday. They doled out £511 million in state pensions and pension credits since 2019 to dead people. Less than half of the money has been recouped, and basically the losses would be enough, £257 million alone, to cover the scrapped winter fuel payments for up to 1.3 million pensioners. How does this happen?
Well, it happens because records aren't kept properly. There are breakdowns in how the records work. There are, after all, a lot of pensioners which are paid out all the time. So there's a lot of money goes out the door on pensions on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So all of these records have to be kept up to date. The question is, how did they slip through the net? How did their death not get through? Was there criminal activity in all of this? Sometimes there is, where you don't tell them that somebody's died and you keep receiving the checks and say, oh, well, you didn't know what this was all about. So there's probably a bit of that going on in there as well. But I have to say the one thing I am grateful for is not have to be that minister that goes into this. It's pilloried for something that somebody once said when I went in to be Secretary of State. What you've got to understand, it was an ex-minister, he said, what you've got to understand, somewhere deep in the bowels of those thousands of civil servants, someone is working away to destroy you completely. And the thing is, they don't even know they're doing it.
Oh, that sounds like a very fair description. Iain Duncan Smith, always good to talk to you. Tory MP, former Conservative Party leader, and of course Work and Pensions Secretary as well.